Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head off of thee. And I will give the carcasses of the armies of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Hello everyone, this is Gilgamesh. Today we're going to talk about the obscure story of a young man named David and his friend Goliath. There may be a story here that is a bit different from what you remember hearing as a child. To understand what is actually happening in the Elah Valley, we have to zoom way out, back to the late Bronze Age collapse, and talk about geography and metallurgy and chariot warfare. The story places the Israelite army on one hill and the Philistine army on the other hill, with the valley of Elah between them. So who are these Philistines? Archaeologically, they were part of the Sea Peoples, a coalition of Aegean origin groups that migrated across the Mediterranean during the systematic collapse of the late Bronze Age, right around 1200 BCE. They settled in the Levantine coast, primarily in the area now known as the Gaza Strip, bringing with them a distinct material culture, advanced military tactics, and most importantly, a mastery of metallurgy. Specifically, they ushered in the Iron Age. At this point in history, the Israelites were essentially high-altitude hillbillies. They control the rugged central highlands, but they lack advanced technology, unlike the Philistines, who seem to have a strong knowledge of stone architecture. The Israelites were still primarily a tent-dwelling people, and even their holiest sanctuary was still a large tent. 1 Samuel 13:19 through 22 sets the grim economic and military reality. Now no blacksmith could be found in all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make swords or spears. If an Israelite wanted to sharpen an agricultural tool, he had to go down to a Philistine blacksmith and pay an exorbitant fee. A Philistine monopoly on metallurgy meant that on the day of battle, neither sword nor spear was found in the hand of any of the people who were with Saul and Jonathan. Iron, in the biblical imagination, was the ultimate symbol of invincibility and unyielding strength. It is the metal of the Canaanite iron chariots that kept the Israelites out of the plains, as in Joshua 17:16. It's the stuff that the mythical Leviathan treats like straw in Job 41:27. The Israelites did not have it. The Philistines did. This technological disparity explains why the armies are having this staring contest in the Elah Valley. Geography dictates military strategy. The Philistines controlled the coastal plains, and they utilized a terrifying piece of military hardware, the chariot. Chariots are the Bronze and Iron Age equivalent of tanks, but they have a fatal flaw. They require flat, smooth terrain to operate. They cannot drive up the rocky Judean hills where the Israelites live. The Valley of Elah is a broad, flat wadi that serves as a natural highway leading straight from the Philistine coast up to the Israelite highlands. The Philistines are trying to push through the choke point so they can deploy their chariots into the heart of Judah. But oddly, no chariots are actually mentioned in this story. Why not? Perhaps they are so well understood as to not be worthy of note, but everything about the story does seem to have them in mind. Yet the ghost of the chariot warfare is presented in Goliath himself. Enter the champion. The text provides this Homeric catalog of his gear, which is unusual. The Hebrew Bible rarely cares about detailing armor so specifically. We read that he has a bronze helmet, a breastplate of scale armor weighing 5,000 shekels, that's roughly 125 pounds, bronze greaves, a bronze javelin, and a spear with an iron head weighing 600 shekels, about 15 pounds. Archaeologists and historians note that this setup, specifically the bronze greaves and scale armor, looks suspiciously like a heavily armored Greek hoplite from the 7th to 5th centuries BCE. It is possible that later Judean scribes, familiar with the terrifying Aegean mercenaries employed by the Egyptian army in their own day, updated Goliath's armor to make him the ultimate state-of-the-art killing machine. But there are also good arguments that his armor would fit within its 11th century setting as well. He is a grotesquely quantitative embodiment of material power. And then there is verse 7. And the shield bearer marched in front of him. Why does a giant need a guy to carry his shield? Because it's a sinah, a massive, full-body siege shield, far too heavy and cumbersome to carry while wielding a javelin and spear. But this also echoes chariot tactics. In a standard ancient Near Eastern chariot crew, you had the driver, the archer or warrior, and the shalish, literally the third man, whose sole job was to hold the shield and protect the other two. This strengthens the idea that Goliath is part of a chariot unit. Goliath steps into the valley as the Ish Habanaim, literally the man between the two battle lines. He proposes a battle by champions. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your slaves, 1 Samuel 17:9. Many modern readers think that this was an ancient mechanism for war avoidance, a civilized way to save lives by letting two guys duke it out. But that is not at all the case. The combat was never about avoiding a battle. It was a theological augury. It was a ritualized method to determine the disposition of the gods. It was an opening to the battle, not a substitute for it, as is made clear in several of the statements. Each side would put forward a man that was touched by their god, and the outcome of that battle would express the disposition of the deities, and as a result, one side would take heart while the other might break and run. When Goliath curses David by his gods, David responds, I am come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel. In 1 Samuel 17:45, using the God of Israel's military title, they are acknowledging what is actually happening. The duel is a localized physical manifestation of a cosmic battle. The augury is cast. Israel is emboldened. The Philistines panic, and a massive bloody rout ensues all the way back to the gates of Gath and Ekron. Meanwhile, our hero David arrives at the camp not as a soldier, but as a delivery boy bringing roasted grain and cheese to his brothers. Here the narrative leans into subtle, brilliant comedy. When David arrives, he hears the battle cry. This was a terrifying sound for anyone who values their life. They get out of the way. To the contrary, David leaves his wagon, apparently the driver had no desire to get a closer look, and runs into the sound of battle, apparently carrying no weapon. This is a boy who has little fear and craves adventure, and his older brother calls him out on it. He is chided for not adhering to his duties to the sheep and for his naughty heart. David, in the most teenage way possible, replies back with, "What have I done now?" We often picture David as this deeply pious and purely motivated youth here, but listen to his first recorded words in the story. What shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? 1 Samuel 17:26. He asks again a few verses later to confirm the payout. David is sniffing out the bounty and perhaps more importantly the fame. He finds out that there's a massive reward, permanent tax exemption for his father's house, and a princess in the bargain. Now he's interested. When he volunteers, King Saul looks at him and says, "You're not able to go against this Philistine. You're nothing but a na'ar, a lad, a boy. And this guy has been an ish milchama, a man of war, since he was a na'ar." In response, David gives an outlandish resume. He claims that while shepherding, along came a bear and a lion. It does not say that these were two separate events. Trying to tone it down, some translations will insert an or there, a bear or a lion, as though David isn't sure of the difference. Already this sounds like a plot from a cartoon. When a lion and a bear took a lamb, I went out after him and punched him and got the lamb back. Then I caught him by his beard and punched him and killed him. 1 Samuel 17:35. There's no mention of any weaponry, no sling, no staff. The description sounds like he is talking about a bare-handed combat, grabbing by the beard and punching the face. You can almost hear Saul grinning and saying, "Really? Sure, kid, you punch bears in the face." Now at this point, Saul is starting to become quite mad. Maybe it was the madness, or maybe it was something else, but in his judgment, this boy was perhaps touched by God and would be allowed to stand for the God of Israel. The first approach is to try and match the technology and weaponry of Goliath. Saul decides to put his own royal armor on the Na'ar. What follows is a little bit of a slapstick. David is covered in bronze and cannot walk. "I cannot go with these," Dave says to Saul in 1 Samuel 17:39. He shucks out of the armor. The theological subtext in this is profound. Israel will not be saved by adopting the enemy's heavy mechanical conception of power. Not by sword and spear does the Lord deliver. But the literary effect is memorable. David grabs his shepherd's staff, 5 smooth stones, and his sling. No bronze, no iron. And when Goliath sees him, he also comments, "What is this Na'ar?" And he starts trash talking. David doesn't just stand there. The text explicitly says David ran quickly into the battle line to meet the Philistine. The impression here is of two armies about to clash, and saying that he was not just running at the man, but into the battle line seems to indicate to me that the Philistines have already started their run. Here is David sprinting towards a walking tank, probably hoping that his own army isn't far behind him. Of course, David makes the killing blow, and the Philistines are routed, and the area around the Gaza Strip has remained peaceful ever afterward. After the battle, Saul turns to Abner, his general, and asks, "Who is that Na'ar?" When Abner says he doesn't know, Saul then changes his question and asks, "Then maybe find out who the Elam is." Na'ar, meaning lad. Elam is a word that means a young man coming of age, ready to start training for military or for a trade. David seems to have earned his manhood. Now let's talk about a few textual snags. After the fight, Saul doesn't know who David is. Just last chapter, David was hired as Saul's personal musician and armor bearer. Saul loved him. It was said that David knew a secret chord. It involved the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, and the major lift. But you don't really care about music, do you? How does Saul suddenly not know who David is? This glaring contradiction is our cue to look at textual variants. If we look at the Greek translation, the Septuagint, specifically the 4th century Codex Vaticanus, a massive 44% of the story is just missing. The entire section where David is introduced as an unknown shepherd delivering cheese, and the section where Saul asks who he is, are completely absent from that manuscript. Scholars have proposed that the Masoretic text is a spliced text. A later editor took an older, shorter version where David is already at court and volunteers to fight, and wove it together with an independent version where David is an unknown shepherd boy arriving at the front lines. The main events matched, but the backstory was a little different. The editor spliced them together because both contained value, beloved traditions about Israel's greatest king. Narrative contradictions were just not a concern. Now, this is not the only explanation here, but it is a popular one. But then in the 1950s, the Dead Sea Scrolls come along. In Cave 4, we find a copy of Samuel, 4Q Samuel A. It largely supports the longer Masoretic text narrative, but it throws a fascinating curveball. One of the other differences between the Hebrew and the Greek accounts is the height of Goliath. In our Hebrew account, he is 6 cubits and a span, about 9.5 feet tall. This is well outside of human experience. The Septuagint famously cuts off a couple of cubits and declares him 4 cubits and a span, about 6.5 feet tall. That's still a big dude, but now it is much more in line with common experience. So what did the Samuel scroll in Cave 4 say? 4 cubits. This means that the Septuagint version was indeed well-grounded in a Hebrew original. Based on other discoveries, it seems pretty clear now that multiple versions of the story were circulating at the same time, and this variation did not bother anyone. It isn't clear if Goliath started huge and more rational editors wanted something more believable and shortened him, or if admirers in a patriotic fervor decided to enhance the miracle. There certainly was no shortage of belief in giants in the ancient world, though it is impossible to say if such descriptions were understood as figurative literature or if the people actually believed they might run into one on a journey somewhere. 6'6" warrior clad in scale armor is terrifying enough. So let's talk a bit about the sword. David kills Goliath with a sling, but the text specifically highlights that he doesn't have a sword. He runs up, draws Goliath's own massive sword, and decapitates him. We are never told what this sword is made of, but I think it is likely that it was made of iron, given how much of a prize it seems to be. It is the ultimate reversal, using the enemy's symbol of technological superiority to finalize his defeat. David is too small to bear armor, and the story makes it clear that the armor was claimed but stored away. It was placed in David's tent. Of course, he was a visiting shepherd boy and didn't have a tent, so this is odd. This is used to suggest that there were 2 stories, and the one where he is still a shepherd is separate from the older one where he is already in the military. That armor and weapon became national treasures. David takes the head to Jerusalem for a little show and tell. This must have been especially fun for the Jebusites who still controlled that city. This chronology problem has been studied a great deal, but I'm afraid there is little but guesswork to resolve it. No amount of study changes or adds to what the text plainly says. It seems clear that the narrator of this line exists many years after the event, which is no surprise. One thought is that David kept the skull as a trophy, and that this final arrival in Jerusalem was far in the future. Others claim that he actually brought it to the Jebusite city and that it was intended as foreshadowing. This strikes me as a bit absurd, and of course others just believe that the composer of the story just didn't know the timeline very well. The sword ends up in a priestly sanctuary at Nob, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. Years later, while on the run from Saul, a desperate David retrieves it from the priest Ahimelech, a priest whose name means brother of the king, famously saying, "There is none like that. Give it to me." 1 Samuel 21:9. This marks a major turning point of David, going from the Na'ar, who could not walk while wearing a man's armor, to now a man who not only wields a sword, but a Goliath sword. David has come into his own here. Ahimelech, unfortunately, will pay for his loyalty to David with his life and the life of those around him, as Saul, in a fit of madness, has him and all of his fellows killed. But David wasn't the only giant slayer. Giants are all over the Hebrew Bible. This brings us to what is often cited as the most significant textual problem, and that is 2 Samuel 21:19. Regaling the heroic deeds of David's mighty men, the text plainly states, Elhanan, the son of Yaare-Oregim, the Bethlehemite, struck down Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. Well, that's awkward. It's actually in the middle of a run of giant slaying, where Ishbi-benob, a descendant of the Rapha giants, as well as Soph, and then Goliath the third, and then a fourth unnamed six-fingered man was confronted by Jonathan, who reportedly said, "Hello, my name is Jonathan ben Shammai. You killed my father. Prepare to die." So did David kill Goliath, or did Elhanan? Well, kings do tend to get credit. There are plenty of examples of more recent history where heroic deeds performed by less known figures were transferred to more epic heroes, as it makes a great story. It's possible that the relatively unknown warrior Elhanan killed a giant named Goliath, and over time that feat was transferred by oral tradition to the legendary King David. I mean, they both seem to be from the same hometown. As a side note, the surname Elhanan Yaare-Oregim might be a scribal error. Oregim means weavers in Hebrew, and it is strange for a man to have that as part of his name, meaning weaver, when in the same verse he kills a giant with a spear like a weaver's beam, spelled identically. Now, the author of First Chronicles, writing centuries later, saw this contradiction and attempted to sort it all out. First Chronicles 25 alters the text to read, Elhanan, the son of Yair, struck down Lachmi, the brother of Goliath the Gittite. This solves a few problems. The weaver portion of Elhanan's name is gone. The designation that Elhanan was a Bethlehemite is gone, and instead the giant is given the name Lachmi. A one-letter change turns Beth, from Bethlehem, into the direct object marker, and the Lechem part can be treated as a proper name, Lachmi. The word brother is inserted, and now it all makes great sense. Maybe. But it shows us that this era of Israel's history is absolutely steeped in giant lore. The Philistine champions from Gath are repeatedly referred to as the Yeledei HaRapha, descendants of the Rapha, the Raphaim. Like the Anakim before them, they were legendary Canaanite giants. One thought is that the Israelites saw the massive megalithic Middle Bronze Age gates at cities like Gezer and assumed that only giants could have built them. And let's not forget Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada. 1 Chronicles 11 tells us he went up against an Egyptian giant who was 7.5 feet tall and carrying a spear, you guessed it, like a weaver's beam. Benaiah didn't even have a sword. He walked up to him with a club, snatched the massive spear right out of the Egyptian's hand, and killed the giant with his own weapon. Sound familiar? It's the Davidic motif played out again. Of course, his father killed a couple of lion men, and I mentioned that in a previous video on Isaiah. Tell me in the comments why you think a weaver's beam was chosen as the thing to compare a spear to. Then hit like and subscribe if you want more of these kinds of videos. I will leave it to you to figure out what actually happened that inspired the story we find in the Hebrew Bible. It seems there were multiple versions in circulation, and that bothered no one. The fundamental story of a boy facing a monster, an unwinnable fight, impossible odds, one side wrapped in technology and military superiority, and the other with no proper weapon, no armor, just the name. The reality is we've seen this battle play out in history many times. Many have seen it play out in their own lives. Some days, the giants are every cubit of 6 cubits and a span. As you face your own Goliaths, I wish you protection and courage. Shalom.